Thank you for joining us for the Southern Nightmares reading series. This is a monthly online event presented by the Atlanta Chapter of the Horror Writers Association. We will be spotlighting both Atlanta Horror Writers Association members plus non-chapter members from around the world. We also encourage and challenge all other chapters to do something similar. Please let us know when you do similar events because, first we will promote and signal boost what you're doing. And second, I want to watch it. So let us know. I'm Alex Hofelich, your host for this event. I'm one of the editors over at Pseudopod, and we've been bringing short horror fiction to your ears for every week for free for the last 14 years. I'm honored to be working with Peter Salomon and Kitty Sarkozy and Jessica Ann York to bring this event to you. This is my third round of trying it live, and I'm hitting the point where I think I have the hang of it, so that certainly means that I'm due to mess something up. So I ask your patience and forgiveness if I do that. So the Atlanta chapter of the Horror Writers Association features a book of the month. We take a publication from one of our chapter members, and we read it and talk about it on and off social media. After this month, we'll caught up with each of our authors that had books of the month from the beginning of this year before we started this reading series. Pretty excited about that. August book of the month is Allison by our featured guest, Jeff Strand. Jeff is the Bram Stoker Award nominated author of almost 50 books, several of which are in development as motion pictures. His novels include Pressure, Dweller, and Wolf Hunt. According to the internet, Jeff Strand is primarily known for his works of horror comedy, which have earned him the nickname The Clown Prince of Horror. Allison is a standalone novel that came out in March. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this book to set us up before you head into your reading, Jeff?
Is Allison. Allison, as you see on the cover, is a 45-year-old woman with telekinetic powers. Sort of imagine her as if Carrie lived through high school and went on to basically live a life of seclusion. And at the beginning of this reading, our villain, Daxton Sink, who knows that she has these powers, is on his way to kidnap her, and he's accompanied by Forrest, who is a big creepy guy who Daxton does not actually want to be working with. All right, said Daxton, let's go. Where's the chloroform? In my car. Get it. I know, we're not gonna leave without your precious chloroform. Have you ever tried knocking yourself out with it? I said, let's go. Daxton got out of his car. Forrest got out, walked over to his own car, and retrieved a small brown paper bag. Got my knockout juice, I've got my gun, and I've got my knife. Anything else? Leave the gun. That's not gonna happen. We're delivering her to Winlaw. We're not killing her. Yeah, I understand that, but I'm not putting myself into a potentially dangerous situation without my gun. I can tell that you're carrying. Well, I know I won't shoot her. I don't trust you. Forrest chuckled. I'm well aware that you don't like me, but Winlaw sent me for a reason. You, Daxty, are the one who's trying to redeem himself. I'm totally good. If I screw this up, maybe Winlaw will try to kill me, but that's not your problem. So who does Daxton Sink worry about? Shut the hell up. I'll ask again. Who does Daxton Sink worry about? I said, shut the hell up. He worries about Daxton Sink, that's who. Don't worry about me, I've got this. Now let's go slam a chloroform-soaked rag into that bitch's face. Daxton and Forrest walked toward the house. Daxton wouldn't take all the blame if this job went bad, but he couldn't be part of two disasters in a row, even if Forrest was the one who botched it. But Forrest, repulsive as he was, knew what he was doing. This would go fine. Here's how it's going to work, Daxton said. I'm going to knock on the front door while you pick the lock in the back. I'll keep her distracted. You sneak in, get as close as you can without her noticing, and then pounce with the rag. Forrest nodded. Not very elegant, but I like it. Just get her with the rag. Don't hurt her. I'm not going to start biting her fingers off. I will ever so gently lower her unconscious form to the floor, taking care to get nary a hair out of place. I know you're trying to be an asshole, but that's the right way to do this. I'm trusting you. Forrest gave him a salute, then hurried around the back of the house. Daxton walked up to the front porch and rang the doorbell. And I will rudely interrupt myself to skip ahead, and at this point, Daxton and Allison believe that they have worked out their differences. I just wanted to apologize, said Daxton, give you a hug, and let you know that everything is going to be all right. Allison had been feeling an intense, almost overwhelming sense of relief. When Daxton held out his arms for a hug, the vibe changed a bit. It wasn't simply that Allison wasn't a hugger. Daxton had a subtle change in demeanor, a sudden sense of desperation, as if he knew he was trying too hard. She'd believed everything he'd said up to this point, but in this moment she worried that he hadn't only come back to apologize. I'm sorry, she said. I'm not much of a hugger. He lowered his arms. Neither am I. I just thought it was appropriate here. Will you settle for a handshake? Of course. He stepped forward, staring into her eyes, staring too intensely into her eyes, as if he was purposely trying not to break eye contact. Allison did not consider herself a particularly good judge of character, but she could tell when something felt wrong. And if her powers had included something useful like spidey sense, it would be tingling right now. She glanced behind her. There was another man in the house. He was about 10 feet away, a big, scary-looking guy holding a dripping rag. He lunged at her. Allison screamed. Forrest, with that creepy-ass grin, rushed at Allison as soon as she saw him. Daxton had a moment of horror, thinking that he'd grab her, snap her neck, and say, oops, as her dead body dropped to the floor. Instead, right before he reached her, he just stopped. His outstretched arms fell to his sides. He dropped the chloroform-soaked rag to the floor. Forrest stood there, looking bewildered. Daxton should have used this opportunity to grab Allison from behind, drag her over to the rag, and shove her face into it. Instead, he took a great big step back. Now Forrest looked like he had an instant migraine. His mouth fell open, but he didn't say anything. His whole body began to quiver. Tackle her, Daxton thought, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He didn't want her to focus her attention on him. He wanted Forrest, who was bigger and stronger, to break free of whatever spell she had over him and take her out. Daxton had a goddamn gun. He could threaten her with it. He could make her stop. But he wasn't prepared to actually shoot her. And if she called his bluff, basically he was a coward. Her display of power before had terrified him, and he couldn't bring himself to attack her for fear of getting a second dose of it. Forrest gave him a pleading look, as if mentally begging for help. Thin rivulets of blood trickled down the sides of his mouth. Daxton took another big step backwards. Forrest whimpered. Daxton didn't know if it was from terror, excruciating pain, or both. Do something, for God's sake. Forrest's whimper turned into a moan. A bloody tooth dropped out of his mouth, then another. Blood ran down his lips and from his nostrils as teeth kept falling to the floor. His eyes went wide as he started to gasp for breath, as if choking on a molar. He coughed, sending a spray of 6 or 7 teeth into the air. Blood began to stream down his face from his ears. At this point, Daxton knew he had to get the hell out of there. But there were still Winlaw's raids to contend with, so he couldn't just flee the house, run to his car, and speed off. Forrest dropped to his knees. Blood was now leaking from his eyes. The poor bastard was still alive, but he wasn't going to last much longer. More teeth fell out of his mouth. As soon as he died, Allison would almost certainly come after Daxton, so he needed to figure out a plan immediately. Just get her. No, he couldn't do it. Shoot her in the leg. Shooting her in the leg might solve the problem, and it might mean that seconds later he had blood gushing from all of his orifices. Then he saw her cell phone resting on the coffee table. He'd swipe it up and run, trap her in the house without a way to call for help. Without further thought, he rushed for the phone and grabbed it. Forrest let out a cry of agony as Daxton ran for the front door. He threw the door open, hurried outside, and pulled it shut. He took out his pocket knife and frantically ran around the house, looking for a cable. There it was. He cut the white cord, hoping this would kill her internet access. He ran around the rest of the house, but didn't see any other cables. And then, because he didn't know how far her homicidal powers could reach, he fled from her yard. And that was Allison.
So I have to sing the praises for the cover art. You just got to hold that up again. I absolutely love everything about it. It's got that paperbacks from hell vibe. I love how the hand is kind of an extension of the power, psychically breaking the text in the title. Just absolutely wonderful.
By Lynn Hansen.
Can you tell us a little bit about the collaborative process between you and your cover artist?
The collaborative process is usually me saying, well, I've got this book and it's about a telekinetic lady. I don't know. So my contribution is usually very minimal or incorrect. So pretty much everything you see here came from her. She wanted, she loves the paperbacks from Hell stuff, so we definitely wanted an 80s vibe, which was her idea. And the font is hand drawn. That was her creation. And it's plays a big part. And I don't know how well you can see it here, but the broken letters in Allison represent the many broken bones that happened during the course of the book. But that was all Lynn Hanson. I can take no credit for really any part of that except for signing off on it and saying, good job.
Well, yeah, I will second that as well then. So, shifting gears a little bit. So you were Toastmaster for 10 years at the Stokers, and I had the pleasure of watching you present several times. You always managed a really good blend of humor and humility. You kept the ceremony moving along and kept the winners centered. What's one of your favorite memories of being Toastmaster?
I think probably my favorite joke was saying, this is going to be the first introduction with a jump scare. And so I read the opening of The Haunting of Hill House in a very quiet, creepy tone, and then just a jump scare, right? And it worked. It got most of the audience. So I'm proud to have done the one introduction in the history of awards banquets to include a jump scare.
That's fantastic. So Allison came out in March, and you've released a couple books since then. I used your bio from a couple months back, and it said that you were almost at 50 novels at that point. When do you hit that milestone, and what book is going to get you there and when?
You know what? I'm not sure. I hit a point where I'm close to 50 novels, but I haven't actually figured out which one it is. So I should probably do that at some point. But I couldn't.
Yeah, let us know. We'll
Unless you want to keep the camera on me, and I'll go to my website and do a count. If the other readers are cool with that, I'll figure it out on camera. But I guess we'd need a unanimous vote.
Well, we can bring you back. Towards the end.
Because I'm sure the audience is just dying. The audience cannot wait. They're going to be distracted from all the readers to just figure out what novel 50 is going to be.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will make sure that we either you work on it or we'll bring the answer to everybody afterwards. All right. Well, thank you again for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
So our next reader is Nathan McCullough. Nate is a veteran journalist, editor, and writer who's worked in the Atlanta area for more than 20 years. As a newspaper columnist, he's the winner of both the Georgia Press Association's Joe Parham Trophy for humor and the Otis A. Brumby Trophy. His first fiction story appeared in the mini anthology from Alban Lake Publishing in 2019. His novella short story collection, Drag You Down, debuted in 2020, and he serves on the staff of Ginger Nuts of Horror. So, what article over on Ginger Nuts of Horror are you most proud of this year and why?
Well, I like my introduction to myself. Jim lets everybody write something that kind of tells why they got into horror. But I've also done a couple of interviews with two really outstanding women writers, Sherry Sebastian Gabriel, who I used to work with a long time ago at the newspaper, and Kinsey Jennings. And I've been through a stretch where I've been reading a lot of horror written by women, and I firmly believe that they're doing most of the best work right now. So I was pretty proud to be able to bring that to the internet.
So what are you going to be reading for us tonight? Try and set us up a little bit before you take us into the reading.
Okay. Well, I'm going to read an excerpt from Drag You Down, which is my novella short story collection, also covered by Lynn Hanson, which I absolutely love. It is, I love the noirish look that she gave to it. This is a story about a woman who is a pure psychopath who cannot feel emotion. She also happens to be a practicing witch and can summon demons and evil spirits to do her bidding. her husband dies, and she decides that she's not through torturing him, so she resurrects him. And when he comes back, his undead self wanders into his old bar, where he is discovered by his old drinking buddies, who, after figuring out what's going on, decide to take him to one of their relatives' house, who they believe might know something about magic and can help this man get back to the great beyond without being tortured anymore by his wife, Libby. The undead guy's name is Tommy, and they are all in the SUV heading for the other man's, the magic woman's house. And they had just discovered that Libby the witch is hitching along with Tommy by possessing him in a way so that she can spy on them. And this scene is them all discovering that and finding out just exactly how powerful Libby is. Tommy tried to say something else, but his speech turned into a low moan and then stopped, as did all his movement. The look in his eyes went from undead to plain dead and then to something else, a dull red at first and then a deep green, like green fire, like Libby's eyes. Everyone stared at Tommy's face and body, neither of which seemed to belong to him anymore. They were too dumbfounded to speak, minds buzzing, wondering what was coming next. Tommy's mouth opened like he was going to say something, but then it slowly closed again. His eyes followed suit, slowly screwing shut and then snapping open again. When they did, they were Tommy's again. He started to talk, but the words came out in huffs and coughs, spits and fits, like he was being strangled, which was in itself weird for a man who no longer breathed. Listen, told you she's a witch. He made a gurgling sound and then wheezed. He shook his head hard from side to side and then forced out a stream of words. She showed me the things she can do, the things that she can summon. I never told anyone because who would believe it, but you have to know. His head started to twist around like someone was holding the top of it, forcing it to turn too far to the left, and he grimaced as his mouth was forced shut again. He snapped back, fending it off once again, and managed to keep talking, but it was a struggle he was losing. He spoke in a rush. I never got to tell y'all everything at the bar. You have no idea what I've really been through. She's not just mean, she's crazy. Told me once that she lives to cause suffering, especially mine. After she called up one of those things, a monster or something, damn near killed me. She gets off on torturing me, making me miserable. Has to be why she brought me back. She wasn't through. Gus, suddenly lucid, shuddered and shook his head, incredulous. Geez, you're dead and she still wants to drag you down? He said in a voice that was part sympathy, part sheer awe at the woman's spite. That's cold-blooded, man. You have no idea, Tommy said. And then his eyes turned to green fire again and he punched himself in the face. Everyone gasped and Lola jumped back, pushing herself into the seat as far away as possible. Tommy punched himself a second time, opening a bloodless cut under his eye, and drew back for a third blow. It was hard to tell where the next one might go, and everyone flinched and ducked, finding little outlet for escape in the confines of the SUV. But Tommy stopped mid-swing. His eyes were his again. See what I mean? She'll do it to you too. And there's something else in here with me. He uncurled one finger from his clenched fist, pointing it at his head. I can't fight it and hurt her. For God's sakes, you've got to... Tommy's jaw snapped shut like a bear trap, and his eyes went green fire again. This time burning so brightly it looked like smoke might come out of those sockets. The next time his mouth opened, a voice came out none of them had quite heard before. It was a mixture of Tommy's and Libby's and something else. Something guttural, monstrous, low and menacing. The voices were slightly out of phase and pitch with each other, which made them almost painful to hear. If you people know what's good for you, you bring my husband back to me. No one spoke for a minute. Then Mike found his voice. Not gonna happen, lady. He's not your plaything. He doesn't belong to you. Tommy's head swiveled around to look at Mike, who at first matched the murderous gaze pointed at him, but soon he found himself inching backward from against the front dash, trying to get away from the green fire. You sure about that, big boy? Because you can all go home tonight. Just bring him back. Or hell, push him out on the side of the road for all I care. Not like you're gonna hurt him. I'll let this thing in him guide him home. He should have to walk home anyway, trouble he's caused. Point is, this is a one-time offer. Leave me and Tommy alone. Forget this night and everything you saw, or you can keep troubling me, and then who knows what might happen to you. Tommy's hand raised and pointed a finger at Mike. Then his arm swung in an arc until it had pointed at everyone in the vehicle. Then Tommy's hand dropped into his lap. Something growled faintly deep inside Tommy, and the green fire glowed again, waiting. Mike, Gus, Joe, and Lola all exchanged quick looks, silently questioning each other. They all looked at Tommy again, and then at each other one more time, nodding. Everyone's face read the same, horrified but resolved. Lola crossed herself. Mike flared his nostrils. Joe nodded again. Gus leaned forward as near to Tommy's ear as he could get. Do your worst, bitch. You can't have our friend. This time the voice that came out of Tommy's mouth was unmistakably Libby's, screaming so loudly that they all had to cover their ears. That's my excerpt.
Excellent. I appreciate you sharing that with us. So what else is, so it's a novella and some other short stories. What else do you have included in there?
There is a couple of flash fiction pieces. The first one that I published was kind of a black comedy take on a H.P. Lovecraft tale. There's one that I wrote for a contest for Gray Matter Press. It's about suicide. It's about a woman who's a hoarder who loses everything. And then I have a couple of others that are very Tales from the Cryptish. I think I'm a big fan of that show, and I like writing stories that have weird twists and comeuppance for the people who deserve it.
That kind of EC Comics feel.
Very much, yes. I actually had a friend of mine who's a budding filmmaker tell me that one of them he thought would make a great movie.
Nice. That's awesome. So, for your day job, you're a journalist. How has the recent chaos changed the news world, and how does journalism influence your writing?
Well, the recent chaos has really slowed down my writing. I'm actually starting to finally pick back up, but it was the busiest I've ever been in my life. I didn't think that was possible after 9/11. The week of 9/11, that happened on a Tuesday, and on Friday, I collapsed face down on my bed in my clothes and went to sleep because I was so tired. I was hoping the pandemic would be over relatively quickly, and we all know it's not. And so we have all had to really make a lot of adjustments and work really, really hard. But it's finally slowing down a little bit. As far as how it informs my writing, all writing to me is storytelling. And writing a good news story is making the reader relate to it and understand. And what I try to tell reporters all the time is to make it personal, give them something that allows them to feel the emotion of whatever's going on, to be able to identify with it. And I was also a columnist for a long, long time. And I mean, I've told people before, writing a column is nothing but flash fiction that's true. You have to set a pace, have a rhythm, have a hook, and if you do it right, a good ending.
Yeah, you make a really good point that even nonfiction requires a certain narrative structure, that it's just a different version of storytelling. So, well, appreciate that. It's some really good insights, and thank you again for joining us tonight.
I was glad to be here.
So, being part of a large chapter comes with the privilege of being able to access a network of a group of like-minded folks. With the Southern Nightmares reading series, it was important to us as a chapter share that wealth, boost voices outside of our immediate field of view. We're honored to welcome our special guest from the Gulf Coast tonight, Lisa Kroger. Lisa is a horror writer whose book, Monster She Wrote, fantastic book, won, justifiably, won the Bram Stoker Award and the Locus Award in 2020, made the Hugo Long list. When she's not writing horror, she explores the darker genres of film and literature as the host of No Fear and Monster She Wrote podcasts. She credits much of her success to a bedazzled skull named Yorick she keeps on her desk. And you can follow her on Twitter at LB Kroger or Instagram at Lisa Kroger. So Lisa, I understand that you are going to be reading an excerpt from Monster She Wrote tonight.
Yeah, I am. Thank you so much for having me, by the way. I'm very, very excited, and I'm excited to share a little bit of Monster She Wrote with y'all tonight.
Set us up the section that you're going to be reading a bit from.
Okay. So I'm going to read a little bit from the introduction, which was basically my answer to why women would want to write horror, because that is usually the first question I get asked in interviews, or just, by family members and friends, is, why can't you write something nicer? So yeah, I thought I would read a little bit of this introduction, and then I would share just a little bit from one of the authors that we cover in the book, just to give y'all a little taste. So here I'll go. Why are women great at writing horror fiction? Maybe because horror is a transgressive genre. It pushes readers to uncomfortable places where we aren't used to treading, and it forces us to confront what we naturally want to avoid. And women are accused of being transgressive all the time, or at the very least, they are used to stepping outside of the carefully drawn boundaries that society has set for them. Women are told to be sweet, to raise children, to stay in their place. We are pushed to the edges of society where we're expected to keep our mouths shut and our heads down. The marginalization of women may have been more overt in the past, at times when women couldn't vote or own property or work outside the home, but it still happens today. Women are still instructed to be good girls. In any era, women can become accustomed to entering unfamiliar spaces, including territory they've been told not to enter. When writing is an off-limits act, writing one's story becomes a form of rebellion and taking back power. Consider, for example, Margaret Cavendish, who in the 1600s brazenly wrote about science and philosophy, two subjects then considered to be the purview of only male minds. More recently, Joel Gomez brought an African-American and lesbian perspective to the vampire tale, which had long been the province of European male protagonists. Today, writers like Carmen Maria Machado and Helen Oyeyemi subvert the so-called safe storytelling formats of the fairy tale and the supernatural yarn, adding women's voices to these traditional narrative forms. For women especially, writing is often a kind of non-compliance, which calls to mind the prisoners in the comic book series Bitch Planet, by writer Kelly Sue DeConnick and artist Valentine DeLandro. The comic is brilliant. It tells a female-driven dystopian story about women sent to a prison planet as punishment for being non-compliant. What a great word to describe the women in this book. Here's the funny thing. Society doesn't always pay attention to what's happening over on the edges. So while society was ignoring these women, they were taking up their pens. While everyone else has been doing their own thing, women have been doing theirs. Crafting tales about scientifically reanimated corpses, ghosts of aborted children, post-apocalyptic underground cities. Horror has been penned by men and women alike, but it's important to acknowledge that women have been contributing to the genre since its inception. There have been misbehaving women all along who wrote horror in all its nasty forms. So the woman I wanted to talk about today was one I thought a lot of people probably didn't know a lot about. And her name is Pauline Hopkins. She was an African-American woman who wrote speculative fiction, among other things, around 1900, 1902, 1903. And her fourth novel of One Blood, or The Hidden Self, is one that we wrote about in the book. It was serialized in the Colored American from 1902 to 1903, and it fully embraced the speculative themes of the day, incorporating a lost race, archaeology adventure with romance and aspects of the occult, from mesmerism to spiritualism to ghost to automatic writing. The protagonist, Ruel Briggs, is a medical student who hides in his African-American identity and has an interest in mysticism and the occult. He falls in love with a woman he sees in his dreams, and then he meets her in real life performing at a concert. On Halloween, he and some colleagues are investigating the grounds of a haunted house when she appears to him again, but this time asks for his help. When she shows up seemingly dead at the hospital where he studies, Briggs employs his mystical knowledge and revives her with a vial of life-giving powder of his own formulation. As the story progresses, he sets out on his own to a trip to Africa to look for artifacts and treasures, and there he discovers a hidden country untouched by colonialism. It's a lost civilization that would be familiar to anyone who has ever seen the movie Black Panther. This lost civilization is the root of all culture and knowledge on Earth, much older than any Western civilization. Briggs finds more than he bargained for, and if you read the book, so will you.
So I appreciate you sharing that with us.
No problem.
That one also is one of the things that this book has done is it's done some serious damage to my to read pile, and you and Mel really did a ton of research and introduced us to a whole bunch of stuff that we hadn't seen before. I have to do a shout out for these interstitial art pieces. Y'all need to buy this book. This one for the pulps is fantastic with Chamblot and the canal and Eli Coulter all shown in here. Absolutely worth your time to pick up this book. It also inspired us to do some research into available opportunities to introduce Pseudopod's audience to some more of the authors highlighted here. One of the results from these efforts is finding some excellent stories from Mary Elizabeth Councilman, such as Cordona's Skull. And tomorrow we're releasing this skull as an episode that you and Mel very graciously hosted for us. So really excited to be sharing that in 3.5 hours. So to give a little bit more time, what are one or two more authors that you want to make sure that people rediscover?
Ooh, I mean, that's a hard one. I think people ought to go back and read some of the Gothics. So somebody like Regina Maria Roche or Charlotte Dacker. There's one woman named Mary Ann Radcliffe who wrote a really, really fantastic book called Manfroni, or The One-Handed Monk. And if that does not make you want to read it, then I just can't help you, because he gets his hand chopped off and thrown into the fire on like page 2. It's amazing.
Awesome. So you host 2 podcasts about horror, No Fear and Monster, She Wrote. I particularly enjoyed the series that you did on No Fear about cults, and your summer series is always lots of fun. Where would you recommend that people enter either of these podcasts?
Well, Monster, She Wrote podcast, we made it so that you can really enter it anywhere. It's kind of like a reading series book club. So the idea is that we talk about books and our listeners have read them before they listen to the podcast. So you can really pick that up anywhere. And then, the cult one in No Fear was particularly fun. A lot of people really like when we did the occult one, and we talked about, you know, people like Dion Fortune and things like that. That was a lot of fun. So I think y'all also joined us for an apocalyptic one.
Yes.
Day of the Triffids, which was a blast.
That was. Loved that. And John Wyndham, so much fun.
Yeah.
And yeah, the spiritualism, not just because of Mary Elizabeth Councilman, but your series on spiritualism was another one of the things that made us think about inviting you along for Cordona's Skull, because that's a key component of that story. So
yeah, that's a fun story. I'm excited for people to hear it.
Yeah. The narrator that we've got is a horror writer from Michigan. Always does a fantastic job. So, well, Lisa, thank you again for joining us tonight. Really,
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate having you. So our next reader is Jessica Ann York. Jessica is a horror writer whose debut short story is forthcoming in Vastarian. And if y'all haven't seen this publication, this is the most recent issue earlier this year. They do a fantastic job, bleak existential horror. And Jessica currently serves as the content editor of the official text request blog and is an associate editor over at Pseudopod. Her fiction centers around women who take comfort in using the macabre as a window to understand their daily anxieties. Through writing and research, she's come to love the things that used to scare her, like the baby tarantulas, snakes, and rats she has raised. So Jessica, what are you sharing with us tonight? Set us up a little bit for taking us into your reading.
Yeah, I'm reading my debut short story that's forthcoming in Vastarian, and I'm just going to read the first 3 pages. I usually write about Southern women because I am a Southern woman, and the story is based on this horse that I had named Bootlegger. And I'll never forget, I have this crazy memory of this horse where he was calm and usually just like a normal horse. And then one day my grandpa walked down like he did every day, except he was wearing a white cowboy hat. And that horse had such like a fierce response. He was chained up, we were going to saddle him, and he ripped the chains off the wall and went sprinting away as soon as he saw that white hat. So this story is based on what I think may have happened to that horse. So this is Phases of the Shadow.
Over to you.
I wake up tasting dust and horsehair. For a while, I trick myself into believing the remedy for this is to find Hunter's lips in the dark and press myself against him until my hallucinations pass. He knows. Within the first 3 months of us dating, he's woken to find me kneeled at the foot of his toilet, mason jar from the pantry gnarled in my fingers as I try to trap something only I can see crawling across his bathroom tiles. I'm so focused on aiming the jar, I scream when he flashes his cell phone light on me. After that, until we move into our own place, Hunter holds me down if I try to get up at night. My roommates heard you scratching at the floor with this thing, he says when he opens the sealed mason jar the next day. Diane, I know your night terrors are harmless, but if the boys ever came outside their rooms and saw you crawling on the floor like that, they'd probably go for their guns. Dad also considers my nightly hallucinations something along the lines of harmless, like I'm some sleepwalker that needs protection from stumbling into furniture, or one of the mindless, purebred herding dogs on my family's farm that have to be chained down during thunderstorms. But I have complete control over my body, just not the things it sees, and I'm not sleepwalking. Mom tells me she sees ghosts and angels whenever she gets caught between sleep and waking. I know we're just hallucinating, hypnagogic hallucinations. Up to 1/3 of people will experience them in their life. Ours get worse when we're stressed. Sometimes I sit up, even walk toward the squirming shapes, squinting with red cracked eyes in an attempt to make the pale-skinned girls and horse-headed men dissolve, even though Hunter will drag me back to bed if he catches me. My brain has to unscramble itself from my nightmares on its own time, and I can't force it to go faster. I want to learn how to make the hallucinations stop. Remember the tornadoes that hit Bedford County when you were little? Mom asked the first time I start seeing things when I wake up. You mean that summer we were always hiding in the closet? I'm 12. Dad hasn't sold Lilith or the other Tennessee walking horses yet. Saddle oil and lemongrass still drift through the humid barn air where Mom and I stand. Yes, Mom says, the visions are like tornadoes. She believes we should bunker down in our sheets, hold our breaths, do nothing until the shadowy funnels coalesce and disintegrate. I go through multiple phases where I hate her for telling me that. All the Tennessee walking horses in the stable whinny and bray for the touch of her patient hands whenever Dad is done soring their legs with kerosene. By irritating the horse's skin with chemical burns, Dad forces them to raise their feet higher up off the ground when they walk. He makes money breeding and selling these special walking horses, despite soring being illegal. Everyone turns a blind eye. Showing Tennessee walking horses is a beloved tradition. They're pretty to watch. Mom is the one who removes the chemical-soaked bandages from their legs, while I am the one who screams for Dad to stop whenever he heads with his dogs toward the barn wearing his tan work gloves. These horses, particularly Lilith, learn to associate my cries with his and his dog's arrival. I want to buy one of your parents' border collies, Hunter says, staring out through our kitchen window at our empty fenced-in backyard. It's our third week living together. We're cooking dinner. Fireflies chase each other across the moist, uncut summer grass outside. Their flashes are crazed, desperate to find each other before an oncoming thunderstorm in the distance hits. No, you don't, I say. I want to get a girl and name her Lilith, he says, one with blue eyes. Grease pops out of our frying pan and strikes my arm as I back away from the stove. Lilith. It's pretty sounding, isn't it? Hunter is still focused on the backyard and hasn't noticed me stepping away to swat the grease off. You've been saying it in your sleep. You can't name a dog Lilith. He turns, surprised, and then reaches for the fresh burn on my arm. Why not, baby? Dad had a horse named Lilith.
Excellent. At some point, you talking about the horse, just popping out of its chains gave me a nice visceral response. At some point, I will have to show you the scar that I've got up the whole side of my hand that I was gifted from a horse that was distinctly not interested in being where it wanted to, where we wanted it to be. So they're big, powerful, kind of terrifying beasts.
Mm-hmm.
So, we've got several more stories coming up for publication, and you're working on your first novel. Tell us a little bit more about one that you're particularly excited about.
The next story that's coming out in September is called Women of the Mirror, and it's coming out from Cemetery Gates Press, and it's going to be in the anthology Places We Fear to Tread. And I'm really excited because that particular short story, it follows this theme of this other one where it's about another Southern girl, and it's centered around the Normandy Dam where I grew up. And so I saw the call for that particular anthology. They wanted real life places. And I just happened to have that story, and I submitted it and got a same day acceptance, which was really exciting and made my heart really warm because I'm excited to share like the creepy dam I grew up around. But I don't know if it'll change, but at the time the editors were telling me it'll be the last story. The anthology will end on that story. So awesome. We'll see if that comes through, but yeah, I'm excited too. I'm a new writer, and I have 4 pro-rate publications, but I haven't had a chance to hold them yet. So I'm excited to finally get them in my hands. So
awesome. Well, that's really exciting. So shifting gears a little bit, what are your favorite microbreweries, and can you recommend pairing a perfect beer with a perfect horror book?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I love mead. And there's a great meadery called Bee Nectar, and they actually have a mead called Necronomicon. I think I'm saying it right. And it's a Lovecraftian inspired mead, and it's really, really good. So I would say that definitely would go great with any horror story. I think I bought a bunch of those after I finished defending my thesis. So
awesome.
Yeah.
That sounds perfect. And at some point when large gatherings are acceptable again, we'll have to go. We will have to drag you down to Viking Alchemist.
Yes, I'm excited. I miss seeing everyone. I'm new to the community, so having all of you is just really exciting. Having Lisa Kroger, like just being in a reading with her, I have a girl crush. So it's just cool. It's nice to have such an awesome community to go to.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us again tonight.
Thank you guys.
So our final guest tonight is Andy Davidson. Andy's debut novel, In the Valley of the Sun, was a finalist for the 2017 Bram Stoker Award for Superior Achievement in a Verse Novel. This is Horror's Novel of the Year and a 2018 Silver Falchion Award and the 2018 Edinburgh International Book Festival First Book Award. Excuse me. He holds an MFA in fiction from the University of Mississippi. Born and raised in Arkansas, Andy makes his home in Georgia, where he lives with his wife and a bunch of cats. So you were one of our Book of the Month features earlier this year with your second novel, The Boatman's Daughter. Y'all probably can't tell in this video, but the feel of this book is amazing. It's got kind of a snakeskin texture to it. For those of you who have a weakness for well-constructed books, this is a dangerous book for you. I can't recommend it enough. And then Andy just had the reveal for the UK cover of the book, and the cover art's fantastic. So, Andy, what are you reading for us tonight? Set us up a little bit before you take us into your reading.
Okay, so as Alex said, this is the book. It came out in February. What I'm going to read tonight is actually not in the book. I thought I would do something I've never done before and basically read a deleted scene from the book. So I was cleaning out one of my drop boxes for this novel and getting rid of some things, moving some things around, and I came across a few files that were like scraps and bits and pieces of things that had not made it into the book that I had saved because I just liked them.
Nice.
And yeah, this one centers around a character who is a major player in the book, and parts of this actually did come into the book in terms of setting. If you've read the novel, you'll know that along the river there in Arkansas, there is a cult that's in its decline. And there are various sort of low-life type people who are still associated with the business of this cult, which is running drugs upriver into Texas. And sort of the linchpin in that operation is a weary, cynical, pot-smoking character by the name of John Avery. And John sort of became one of my favorite things about the book. And I found this piece, which takes one of the settings from the book, which is kind of an old rundown cathedral that's on the property. This is actually something that never happens in the book, but I just thought it was a great insight into parts of his character that are actually pretty true. So I'm going to read a deleted scene from The Boatman's Daughter featuring John Avery. Away and into a dense pine thicket, where the land began to slope up from the river, he walked, until the trees thinned, and soon he had come to a high place where the grass grew almost as tall as he. And there in half shadow against the coming morn were the tall stone ruins of a long-burned church, only its Gothic facade remaining, its buttresses holding fast in the earth like the outspread wings of a crippled dragon. Wisps of pines growing between cracks in the spires, a rotten slatted window above rotten doors. In back, a few granite tombstones before the tree line, and beyond the trees, the stone wall that circled the vast acreage of the compound, 8 feet high and studded with green glass. And finally, at the eastern-facing base of the old church, set into a hollow at the bottom of the hill, where a gnarl of kudzu had all but overtaken it, the granite maw of an iron-shut crypt. Avery gave the crypt a wide berth and walked atop the hill among the ruins, between burned oak pews long given over to nature, between pine and maple saplings where once a sanctuary had stood, where congregants had worshipped in fearful symmetry. The inner wall of the facade was scorched black. Avery knew some history about the place, namely that it was Built before the Civil War and burned near the end of it by a Yankee captain and a squad of half-crazed marauders, the preacher and a few of his congregation locked inside, barred and cooked in the belly of God's comfort, and now forgotten by the town of Prosper in the county of Nash, now a part of the ministry's property, frequented only by a dwarf and maybe a handful of local kids who slipped over the wall on a dare to smoke dope and fuck. Avery climbed up and sat in what was left of the pew nearest where the altar would have been, only a mound of dirt there now grown over with weeds and wild roses. His legs dangled like a child's. Avery had never been a praying man, and while his years of service in the ministry of Sabbath House had all but guaranteed he never would be, he sometimes thought when he came here to this place, and he frequently did of late, that he was near the infinite, the dark and backward abyss of time, not the domain of any New Testament or Old Testament God, nor the boogeyman Billy Cotton had once preached before the drugs and madness had taken hold. In the early days of the Reverend's flock, Avery had taken a kind of cosmic comfort in this, the shared fate of all as loss and oblivion, rot, yes, even unto the servants of God, especially unto them. We all got it coming, he thought once. But he was a father now, a husband. Both of these things new to him, new by months, like unearthed tombs in his heart, their riches brought out into the light, cataloged and counted. And so the dwarf listened to the hot morning wind moan through the chapel's cadaver, and the sound it made was like that of a ghostly choir sending psalms heavenward in search of a God who was not the God of charnel houses, who was not the God of death and rot. John Avery had never been a praying man, but tonight he closed his eyes and joined that chorus. He closed his eyes and listened for something that would sound like comfort from the dark, a message from a God of peace and mercy. He listened, he listened, he listened.
Thank you for sharing a deleted scene with us. That's awesome. So what books are you working on next?
I am working on a third book right now that's coming out through MCD-FSG, and it is it's called The Hollow Kind, and it's kind of the broadest thing I can say about it right now is it's desperately trying to come into being. It's about a young mother and her son in the late 1980s who inherit some property in southeastern Georgia, kind of pine forest country, and they get there, they arrive there in a bit of a state of fleeing their life, and they realize they're not alone in the woods.
Nice. So is this also going to be leaning Southern Gothic?
Maybe a little bit, yeah. I mean, it's hard to be a Southern writer and be a horror writer and not be a Southern Gothic horror writer at times, it feels like, for me. But, eventually I might want to step outside of that. But yeah, I think this one probably is going to have elements of that. But I'm also trying to bring in more of the weird and a little bit more of a folk horror feel to it as well. So, yeah, but there's a rundown house, there's crazy people. So yeah, I guess so.
There is a folk and Gothic, particularly Southern Gothic, share a lot of there's a lot of overlap in that Venn diagram. Mm-hmm. So at your book launch at Eagle Eye in Decatur, you recommended Night of the Hunter by Davis Grubb for excellent Southern Gothic. Would you care to elaborate on this one or make another recommendation?
Oh, well, I mean, the Night of the Hunter, years and years ago, I had a student at a reading ask me, what's your favorite book? And I wasn't ready for your question. Like I'd never thought about it because it just never occurred to me to have a favorite book. And I mean, I have a favorite movie. Why not a favorite book? I just never thought of it. But ever since then, I've latched on to Night of the Hunters. That's my favorite book because it does pretty much everything as a writer I would want to do. And Grubb was a Southern writer in a sense, in the kind of way that you might say Cormac McCarthy was a Southern writer. They came from the South, but they didn't stay in the South. I think Grubb was in West Virginia, and McCarthy was in Tennessee, but McCarthy moves out west, and I think Grubb ends up in the Midwest at some point. But Night of the Hunter is mythic. It's kind of a fairy tale. It brings in elements of faith and religion, and kind of blends them up with realism and noir, and it's a funny book, and it's got influences all the way from the Southern for just Gothic in general, all the way up to Grimm's fairy tales. So I would stick with that one. That's because it's probably a very underread book, and I think a lot of people haven't read The Night of the Hunter. They may have seen the movie, but they're a great companion piece together.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that recommendation. Yeah, doing more research on Southern Gothic has done some damage. Not quite as much damage as Lisa did to my to read pile, but Southern Gothic's doing similar damage. Well, thank you again for joining us tonight.
Yep, it's fun.
So that brings our event tonight to a close. The Southern Nightmare Reading Series will be a monthly online event presented by the HWA Atlanta Chapter, spotlighting Atlanta horror writers and non-chapter members from around the world. Please join us again on the evening of September 27th for another reading series. Our featured guest will be Vanessa Junta, whose novel Javaja will be Atlanta HWA's Book of the Month. Our special guest will be Lee Murray, joining us from New Zealand. Lee's collection Grotesque came out earlier this year, and she's also one of the editors of Black Cranes, an anthology of horror by Asian women due out next month. Rounding out the lineup will be Atlanta's own Kelly Frank, Derek Phillips, and Michael Wehunt. Until then, honor Halloween in your heart and try and keep it all the year.